Hello, everybody. My name is Sophie Ziegler. I am the events coordinator here at Library Juice. I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted that you are here. I'm going to say a couple of things about Library Juice before I switch over and introduce our panelists and then start our discussion about zines today. So, Library Juice has three main arms. The first of which is Library Juice Academy, where we do online professional development for all the things that we might not have learned when we're coming through library and archive school, all the things that we need to be refreshed on, all the things that are new and that we want to get caught up on. This is 4-week classes. Some of them are 6. They're asynchronous, again, online through Moodle. You can choose courses a la carte and or you can follow our certificate paths. Should you want, you can find out more about all of that at libraryjuiceacademy.com. The second arm of what we have is Library Juice Press, where we publish books and articles on critical angles of LIS. This is a wonderful backlist of publications, wonderful titles coming out all the time. We are an imprint of Litwin Books, so you can find more about everything going on over there at litwinbooks.com. And then finally, we have Library Juice Connections, which is what brings us all together. This is our events arm. So we work with folks from Library Juice Academy, folks from Library Juice Press. And then we also hold panels like this on topics that we're just very interested in and that we know other people are interested in. And we want to bring people together and talk about it. So here we are doing that. We've got a lot of wonderful recordings of past sessions up on our website at libraryjuiceconnections.org, where this recording will soon live. If you are interested in doing an event with us, we would love to talk about it. You can find contact information for us at that website. Again, that's libraryjuiceconnections.org. And that is everything I wanted to say about Library Juice. I'm so excited now to introduce our panelists. We're here to talk about zines. So we've got some great people to do it. We've got Violet Fox, who's a metadata librarian at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and she is one of the co-organizers of the Chicago Zine Fest and Twin Cities Zine Fest in Minnesota. And she often helps put out the Zine Pavilion at the American Library Association annual conference. If you've ever seen that, it is a real blessing. So thank you, Violet, for that. We also have Dawn Stahura, who's a research and instruction librarian for the sciences and health sciences, and the zine librarian at Salem State University in Salem, Massachusetts. She has written and published zines since 1992 and has helped public libraries start their own zine collections as well as host Zine Fest. Dawn, I'm so sorry if I mangled your title. Oh my goodness.
It's too long anyway.
And then finally, we have Des Alaniz, who is the director of the Presidio Research Center in Santa Barbara, California. Des has created and facilitated classes and workshops around zines, research, justice, teaching with archives, and activist archives for academic and public audiences for nearly a decade. And they are the founder of the zine distro, Honey Boy Press. If you're not familiar with that distro, definitely go check it out. Thank you all for being here. All mistakes in the bios and pronunciations are entirely my own, and I apologize. But now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's move on. We're talking about zines, and I'm very excited to do this. I've been making zines for a long time, and I imagine that's true of a lot of the people that are here. And a lot of the zine folks that I've met over the years are librarians, which I think is really interesting. I guess my favorite zinesters are librarians in a lot of different ways. So I'm excited about this. And when we had the idea for this panel, reached out to some folks who I knew had overlaps. And I know the people joining us here and watching the recordings will also have a lot of thoughts about this. So let me just say, by way of housekeeping, the chat is open, as everybody may have seen. So please do feel free to use that. The chat does tend to move very fast. So if you have any specific questions that you do want us to see, please do use the Q&A function and we'll get to those. Drop those in anytime and we'll do our best to get to those a little bit later in the event. Okay, now this is the start. Here we go. I'm going to open a little bit thinking about what it means to be a librarian, right? And how that influences your zine practices. And so, Violet, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind, because we've talked a little bit about this in the past, and I love your thoughts about this. So my question is, do you put special thought into how your zines will be cataloged when you're creating them? Like, do you think about how they'll be preserved and live in an institutional setting?
So yeah, so this is like my hottest take. So if you want my hottest take, we're just starting off right hot real quick. It will all go downhill from here, like there's nothing else. But so I really I so I am sort of, my brain is broken and I have to think about library stuff while I do other stuff. And I wish that that wasn't the case, but it kind of is. So when I am doing a zine stuff, I definitely do put in like a publication date and I put in all this, I think about the title and make sure that clear what the actual title is and that sort of thing. And I put my name in a consistent way for the catalogers because the catalogers are my friends and I want to help them. But the big caveat with that is that I don't think we generally should be doing that with other zinesters. Like and actually, so here's the story. Here's a little bit of tea for you. So the Library of Congress back in, I don't know, 2019 or so, did a webinar and they were talking about how to make a librarian's life easier if you wanted to, like how to like make sure that there's a clear publication date, or like make sure that you don't use staples if if you want to make sure long-term longevity for the zine. And I think that's like abhorrent to me. Like I am so repulsed by that. The fact that we would ask zinesters who are not getting paid to make our lives easier when we're getting paid. I want zinesters to do wacky doodle stuff all the time. I want them to do, put rubber bands on their zines. I want them to put, like staple a slice of bologna on there, and then the conservation folks have to figure that out. Like that's our job. And that goes for, even though I'm a cataloger, like I still feel very strongly that we should not be telling, zinesters to like make our job easier, because no, like people want to please us, right? People are people pleasers and like they like librarians and they want to make us happy. But I encourage you all, as if you're a library worker, to not tell zinesters how to make your job easier. That's my hot take. So I'm excited to hear what other folks think.
I admit, Violet, that's spicier than I thought it was going to be. Do you but you do for your own. You add
I
like
absolutely do. I do. And that's just because my brain's broken and I can't. And I understand that like these are my friends and I want to make their lives easier. But again, I don't think we should be telling zinesters to, make our lives easier. Like they're not getting paid. I mean, they're probably losing money on their zines, right? So we shouldn't librarian up their whole situation, like, like librarian derogatory, essentially.
Indeed. And Dawn, let me bounce this over to you. How do you think about this overlap when it comes to making your own zines?
So, like Violet, on my own zines, I do, make sure that I put like dates and um my name. I also put on there like, don't be a dick, do not digitize. And I did have somebody ask me once, like, how would you even know if I digitized it? And I was like, well, I guess I wouldn't, but that is kind of you being a dick. So, like, just like, don't do that. Um, but I think for me, because I teach primarily college students to do zines, I do care a lot about the subject headings that the students come up with themselves. Because as Violet mentioned, the Library of Congress and the classification system, right? It has its inherent issues. So often our students will have identities or situations or life experiences that are not accurately represented by subject headings. So I want them to have that control, and then I'll take it from there. I will say that this is kind of to make my life easier. I used to try to be like, oh, and let's be mindful of like how we're going to copy this and whatever. And now I'm just like, you just like, but just do whatever you're going to do. I will figure it out. Because you should have post-it notes that open up and a timeline that unfolds. Do whatever your heart desires. And I will figure it out on the back end.
Yeah, I love that. I love it. Does. Same question to you.
I'll echo what folks have already said in terms of when I make my zines, I definitely am mindful of zines being a beautiful, glorious pain in the ass to catalog in general. So I do also, put some kind of a date and put some kind of a statement to the reader to provide a little context for the zine generally to make that process easier. Not even necessarily with intention for the cataloger, but I think of it as like something for the reader. So for me, I'm coming from like an archives kind of training and perspective. And so for me, like having a little bit of a sense of context is really helpful, not just for cataloging, but for me to interact with whatever it is I'm interacting with. So I find it really helpful to have that kind of contextual information built in. Is it required? No. Do I catalog things that have like no dates, no names, no anything? Of course, you know. Um, but you know, kind of following up on or piggybacking on what Dawn was saying, for the kind of like when I do zine workshops and I'm working with folks who, you know, a lot of times they just need like permission to do whatever they're thinking of doing anyways. So it's really not the time to be like, well, what about, you know, photocopying? And, you know, it goes back to the intention of like, why are you making this zine? You don't have to tell me, but if you want to share it with people, it's going to be way easier for you to photocopy if you keep these things in mind. But those are, you know, they're not rules. They're like considerations. So I think about it kind of more in terms of considerations for your future readers, rather than like hard and fast rules for catalogers. Because like, yeah, I agree with Violet. Like this is, you know, even not as part of my job, like when I catalog the zines that are like part of my distro work or the zines that other folks like want to make with us, it's helpful to have that basic metadata no matter what. And again, going back to what Dawn said, I agree that getting that information as close to the source as possible is the best possible outcome. So, you know, we do what we can with what we got. But yeah, with the zines that I create, I generally am thinking about it not in terms of a future cataloger. It's always cool when zines end up in libraries, obviously. That's why we're all in this Zoom chat. But I think ultimately what zines will find their reader, you know, like zines will find the reader wherever that is, and it doesn't have to have a date on it. But thinking about what is contextual information that I can share with a future reader about like why I made this, when I made this, what was kind of informing my process at the time, even if that's not explicitly written out in the zine itself.
I just want to, I love what you said, but I also want to gently push back on the idea that it's always good when zines end up in libraries. That's how we get into trouble, right? So you know, I know that that wasn't the whole point of what you were saying, but I do think we all need to be super aware that like sometimes like we are the state in many cases, and we are the man, and like you know, it can be really easy for, you know, especially beginning, you know, library workers who are real jazzed about getting it in and like not maybe think about how like maybe sometimes they don't want it in libraries.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too. And I think this is also like, I'm not coming from an academic library background either at this time. I'm not in a public library. I'm not in an academic library. I work at a nonprofit like historic museum that manages a state park. So like my context is a little different from these other kinds of contexts that we more frequently see zines in. And I know there is like a small zine collection at the public library near me. And there is a collection definitely at UC Santa Barbara that I helped to start when I was there. And so, yeah, the collecting context is also really important. I'm sure we'll get into that a little deeper shortly. Thanks, Violet.
I love that you brought that up, Violet, because that is part of my, I guess, like my agreement. I tell students, like, I find it an honor to be able to, like, that you have entrusted me with your zine. But because we are always evolving, or I hope we're always evolving, that 10, 25 months from now, if you're out in the world and you're like, I kind of wish I hadn't given my zine and I would like it to like go away, just let us know. There's no questions asked. You don't have to fill out any paperwork. I don't need to know the what's going on in your life. Just say, I don't want this available anymore. Done, right? Because zines are so beautiful and intimate and vulnerable. Yeah.
I love that, and I wish I had faith that every library would also follow that practice. You know, because it's so different than what we normally do in libraries. When you know, when James you know, Patterson gives us if he wanted his book back, we would be like, no, screw off, right?
Right. Actually, we'd be like, yeah, take them. I didn't say that.
I'm actually glad that this went in this direction because this is something I was going to ask about collecting. Because, you know, we've seen, and all of our settings are different, but we've seen libraries and other collecting institutions do things that we wish that they hadn't done. And we've seen them be less than respectful with material that they have gotten. And I run a community-based library and try to think a lot about this, especially since this is primarily queer and trans based in the Deep South. And I just wonder, like, how you communicate that in different settings. For instance, if you're Violet, I know you work with, you know, Chicago Zine Fest and even the ALA Zine Pavilion. Like, and I'm just sort of curious, like, do you talk to people at these institutions or at these events rather about what it means for their material to be collected in an institution? Because we know that sometimes librarians will show up with a budget specifically for collecting. And it's not may not always be clear what it means to be collected. And Dawn, with what you were talking about, I'm just curious, is there a way to communicate to students who have their zines in your collection and would like for them not to be? Like, do you have like, how do you communicate to the students like, "Yeah, we'll get rid of that for you." Like, "No worries."
So we have a form that I have them fill out because I want them I want their permission. So there's two levels. There's I'll put your zine on the floor, right? They can always have their original back if they want it, and then we will digitize it if they also would like to go that extra step. And then then they tell me like, what are your subject headings? Because these are done primarily in classes, we also want to know like what class is it for, whatever. And then there's a big piece on the back that's like, my commitment to you is to like, I will hold on to these with love and, what care. And then the event that you need it to be taken down, let us know. With the caveat that like I won't always be alive. So, if any of my Salem State people are listening, it'll be somebody will have to carry that forward. But when I purchase zines, if I'm at a zine fest or if I'm ordering something from Etsy and it's the intention that I'm going to put it in the library, I will tell folks up front. So if you don't want that to happen, then I will not purchase it to put it into the library. I want folks to be able to have an out. So for me, being transparent about what I'm going to do with it.
Well, I think that also goes into just something from when Dawn and I used to work together, like allowing creators to decide if they have permission, if they assign permission to us to even be able to digitize things. And this is something that someone mentioned in the chat, kind of treating zines like oral histories or like archival material, regardless of whether it's a copy of a copy of a copy, but treating them with the same kind of like respect to the donor, respect to the creator kind of vibe, and allowing folks to have that kind of say, which isn't always possible if you're buying for a collection at your institution. You may not be able to get permission from individual zinesters, but I think going through that thought process and justifying your decision making for why you do or don't make those maneuvers is still helpful.
And documenting those decisions and saying why it's not sexy. You don't love it, but you got to do it. It's actually exactly because Dawn is not going to be alive forever, which so it's because and we all aren't going to be alive forever. So no, bless. I was so sorry. If I could, I would. Yeah. So for example, at the American Library Association Zine Pavilion, we have such 101 level conversations. Like I'm just like really jazzed about people getting zines into their libraries, and so like there's no chance for me to have like an in-depth conversation to be like, okay, but then think about 17 other things. And so partly that's why we wrote the Zine Librarian Code of Ethics. To kind of, in that, we wrote that back in 2016. It's, it's really available at zinelibraries.info. I'll put the link in the chat, and you'll be able to find it there. But the Code of Ethics has gone out, I think, spread pretty widely, and like hopefully gets people like, start thinking about, okay, it's not just another collection. It's like something that has specific needs and, special considerations that you want to take into account. You want to understand the people who, zinesters more than you might need to understand people who are creating other things in our collections, right? It's so the Zine Librarian Code of Ethics is, I think we rely on that as a crutch. We're trying to revamp it and update it for 2026. The other thing, actually, and I love a lot of creative ideas happening in the chat, especially like the forums that you ask people to fill out and you sort of say this is what's going to happen with your zine and this is what your rights are. But I think a one-time form is very limited. Of course, people are going to forget about what they filled out 20 days after they fill it out, right? And so actually, I came up with this idea with Joshua Barton, another zine librarian. And we want to actually create a zine that's like how to get your zines into libraries, but like considerations and reflections and sort of problematizing a little bit for zinesters who are considering having their zines in libraries. And we actually proposed this to a zine related conference, and it was rejected. And so, and this was back in April when I was still unemployed, and I was just like, but life, everything sucks. But if you think this is a good idea, please like tell me in the chat so I'll actually do it. Joshua and I can actually do it. Or like if you want to get involved, like what should we be telling them? How can, like, and again, a zine is like one way that we can get that information out of, like, you have the right to, like, we want you to, if you're mad about the way it was cataloged, or you're mad about it, the fact that it's in the zine library at all, like, you should get in touch with those librarians. They might not be cool, but you should try, like, you have the right to say, I don't want this material in your library. And maybe they'll be cool about it, and maybe, point them to the zine librarian's code of ethics, right? So I'm hoping that this idea might be helpful. And please encourage me to actually do it, because I got a lot of ideas, and only about 3% of them actually turn out. So thanks for all the encouragement. Appreciate it.
You have to do it.
Do I have to do it? Okay. I'm real busy, but okay, I'll do it. Well, Joshua and I we'll get on it.
I think that's really great, and I think leads us nicely into something that I want to ask about, but I'm not entirely sure how this question's going to go. So I thank you all for your patience in advance. So a lot of us came to zines often before librarianship, right? So a lot of us came to zines because of the role that they can play in examining and being part of marginalized communities, and understanding ideas that might not be readily available elsewhere, and hearing from people that otherwise you wouldn't hear from. All the things that we love about the content that zines can help transport. And I'm just sort of curious about how it is that you position. So everybody here is very thoughtful. Everybody here, even in the conversation we've had so far today, we're taking very critical approaches to some things about librarianship and collecting institutions. And I'm just sort of wondering, what role does that play in your zine practice? Like, do you think of zines as resistance in different contexts? And if so, can you tie that into your practice as a librarian in any way? I wonder, like, in what ways, practically or even theoretically, that these are connected in your mind?
I will also try to have an answer. We'll see if it makes any sort of sense. So I think that when I am talking about zines with students, and in an academic setting, there is, of course, all kinds of marginalized identities just in who our student population is. But I also think being a student and you come with your knowledge and expertise is also a very small space that you're allowed as a student to claim it. So it's giving students an opportunity to say, like, I do know something about something, and I want to talk about that. And I also feel very strongly, I'm just going to put this out there, I hate AI. This is the hill I'm about to die on, people. So, and I feel like zines are just a beautiful way for students to think differently, process differently, get intimate with their topics, express themselves. We need that. Their mental health needs that, to be a human, to share stories, build community. Like, all of that, I feel like, is so wrapped up in what zines are and what makes them so beautiful and intimate and loving. I don't know. I think it's a beautiful reminder that we're here, we're alive, we can tell a story, we're not robots. Resist it. Yeah.
I think a lot of people are craving this too, because in my kind of zine working context, I'm much more often interacting with like community members here in Santa Barbara. So not working specifically with students. And I feel like a lot of people are really craving these kinds of tactile, very cut and paste, or scribbled, handwritten scribbled variations of that type of engagement, and not just even creating, but interacting with zines. And I keep thinking of that. I think it was a Jenna Friedman article, or she was one of the authors, but the make one, share one, read one, make one, share one. I feel like allowing folks the opportunity to participate in zines, even if they're not specifically creating them, is also really impactful. And having that invitation, that open invitation for like creative chicanery, is really impactful for folks outside of specifically students. And I know a lot of us in the webinar probably are working in academic contexts, but I do want to give a shout out to like the other communities, even in academic environments, that can benefit from interacting with zines. It doesn't always have to be, student focused. Students are in an environment where they're often, open to learning in all these different ways. But I think there's a lot of value in checking our biases and remembering that there's a lot of folks who can benefit even just from reading zines, and let alone the decision making of like, how do I share this? How do I make this? But even like, why does this zine stand out to you? And this is something Dawn and I teach a course through Library Juice about zines for reflective teaching, I think is the name of the class. Been teaching it for years, so I can't remember the name. Sophie probably knows. But it's always really awesome and badass to see what folks bring to that class and the kinds of, and I think especially in the most recent years, now that AI is such a thing, like Dawn is mentioning, folks are really craving this kind of experience. And whether it's like making something yourself or interacting with and being inspired by what other folks make, I think that's all part of the kind of zine ecology that's really impactful and what draws us all into the specific medium. Thanks, Sophie.
I also just want to echo whoever it was that gave that shout out to Violet's zine. It's a beloved favorite of mine and some of my colleagues. Yeah.
Run, don't walk to the link and get it.
And we were talking about this just before this. We were in the chat, but like I would have done something differently. Like if I had known that it would be popular or that it would strike such a chord with people. I've written, it's like 2 years ago now, and people still are emailing me about it, and it's wild. And it really is just like it's that passion that gets across and that unfilteredness, because it's not an academic paper. And I think that really gets people going. People, respond to that. I think, generally, for the most part, for things that are really important in our life, nuance is overrated. That's a quote from me. Put that on. Put that on my bumper sticker. Nuance is overrated when it comes to things like, are we going to have a little mall environment, or, do people, have the right to have unbiased information, like that sort of thing. Like, I think that, we want to, there's people who want to talk real detail things about that. And I'm like, no, it just sucks. Like, it just sucks. And there's a value in just saying, like, man, it just blows. Like, what are we doing?
Oh, and I also want to say, Violet, you had mentioned that you wrote this and you were like just mad, right? This is visceral. And I think that is like a testament to like the power of zines and what we want to bring to our communities, right? Does wherever they may be. If you're pissed about something, that's what I tell students. They're like, I don't know what to write about. Either write about something you love or something that pisses you off, right? Let those can be your two motivators, because we're always pissed about something. And that is like, in the moment, this is the most real, honest thing you're going to get.
Yeah, I love that. My children ask me why I make so many zines about pizza, and it's just you got to write about what you know. Like, I don't know.
The heart wants what the heart wants,
The thinking about the quickness of zines and the writing sort of as an immediate reaction, as opposed to sort of academic writing, for instance. I'm thinking about librarians as educators and what role that plays in your zine practice. Des and Dawn, I know that y'all teach a whole course on that. I wonder if you could just briefly talk about the major topic of the course that you teach, and thinking about zines as research and scholarly potential.
Well, if we can remember the title, right, Des?
I think a lot of it comes back to, I feel like the approach for the class and like teaching other librarians, information workers, is very similar to like working with anybody else, where a lot of it comes down to, and folks who have taken the class will be able to kind of speak on this more. I'm like, panels with you now. Thinking about what are our own blocks to creativity and to our own creativity, as like acknowledging that as part of our human experience of like being in this mortal coil, so to speak, and thinking about that, because a lot of us find it easier, I think, to like be in the teacher role, even if we understand the problematics of being like a teacher and the kind of hierarchies that folks embody in like learning spaces when there's like a specific teacher. And I think a lot of the classes, Dawn and I trying to like unstick ourselves and
Yeah.
folks in the class from that. You wanna jump in, Dawn?
No, that's beautiful. That's exactly right. Yeah, and just also having folks think about, there are different ways to think about the way that we approach teaching. So like we have the ACRL frameworks, right? which I'll be real with you, I don't know that I could name them all right now because I just don't care. And Des and I trying to come up with like different ways that folks can approach their teaching that's more inclusive and make space for people to bring in their own expertise, to bring in different knowledge systems that isn't just this westernized sort of a view of what is an expert and knowledge. And we do a lot of that work in the class too about just what would expansion look like, right? Just a what if we did this? And giving people permission to do it.
Exactly, because when it gets down to it, there is no specific way to teach zines, and there's so many badass resources by so many badass zinesters and librarians about like ideas for like how to kind of pull a zine together. But ultimately, like it goes back to like granting folks permission, or to not because that's valuable to us, but because it's so helpful to have like somebody else be like, yeah, that's a good idea for a zine. Make 20 pizza zines,
Yes.
People need to read that. And so it's like the allowing creativity just for the sake of creativity. Like your zine doesn't have to go in a library. Like we don't spend a lot of time in the class talking about like cataloging zines, or like we do talk about like building collections at whatever institution you're at. But a lot of it gets down to like using zines as a way to access your own kind of creative practice and connecting your creativity to your teaching practice, however that is defined, and a lot of folks are not in specifically teaching and learning librarian kind of roles. But the other thing that we kind of explore in the class, and I feel like perpetually in life, is like there's a lot of different areas where we're teachers. And so like if you have kids, you're a teacher. Like if you work with kids, if you interact with kids at all, you're doing some kind of teaching, and you're definitely doing a lot of learning. So thinking about the ways that we're teachers and learners outside of specifically academic, specifically like teaching contexts is also, I think, something that has nurtured my zine making practice as well. And the types of interactions that I have with folks in like community, like zine office hours, are like things that I do like irregularly, where folks can just kind of come in and like workshop ideas for zines. And a lot of it is like that permission. And a lot of it is just like, do what makes you happy. It's okay to do that. It doesn't have to be, scannable. It doesn't have to be reproducible. It can be one of one, and that makes it beautiful,
Yeah, and I just want to say, I think people also really value the community. There is something to be said about, being in a space where you're all kind of doing this creative work together. And I think folks are often surprised about the variety of zines and what zines can be. Like, I'm sure, Sophie, there's someone out there right now would be like, what? I can make a zine about a pizza? Yes, right? And I get this question from students, like, does my zine have to be overtly political? No, I would argue that it's political anyway because it exists, right? Because you're a person in a body, so it's political. But your zine could literally be how to boil water if that's what you want to write your zine about. Like, it doesn't have to be about, I don't know.
One of my favorite zines I've ever read is How to Make a Peanut Butter and Jelly Sandwich. And it's perfect because it fits the entire little mini zine format. It was made by like a 7-year-old.
Oh.
The final page says, enjoy, with a picture of a completed peanut butter and jelly sandwich. If I ever forget, I have that zine to remind me. It's perfect. I always use that as an example because it's like no topic too small. It's like I made a mini zine about like the 5 rules of library science, and that like definitely changed me too, because doing that in that format really exemplified the like every zenith reader, like all these different sort of things that like are foundational to the work that we do, that I think also we get lost in the sauce because we're laborers in capitalism, right? So it's like reconnecting to that and finding joy in that work, whether it's as part of our paid work or whether it's part of our like life creative work.
Yeah. Oh man, I love it. I love that, and I think of myself, I'm like, oh, I'm not a teacher, but then I sort of am. Like I adjunct, and like I teach every day. I train people, and like so I think we are teachers, in all sorts of ways. But I do, have a lot of respect for people who do it like so often, and do it so well. I do think, like what you said, that like there's no wrong way to there's lots of different ways to teach zines well. I do think that there are ways to teach zines badly. And so like I'm gonna share this link in the chat from Danielle Capistrano, who's the POC Zine project head. And like I think it's a really helpful thing for people to read through just because it's like, because of the zines qualities zines have of being so, vulnerable, like it, gets people in a vulnerable place as opposed to say like in a regular freshman paper or something, or it makes people think, in different ways about, how they present themselves, that I think that there's lots of things to think about in terms of like how we go about like grading that and how we go about like assigning that work of, I know, like if you're an MFA author, fine, but like if you're an undergrad, maybe there's a lot like the power dynamics that you want to give some thought to, especially like I talk to so many library workers who are really jazzed about teaching the zines, and I'm like, go for it, but also maybe think about these tiny little things. So
That's definitely a hill I will also die on. Of don't make zines required, and if you are grading them for an assignment, be really careful with that. Because you're asking, especially if you're asking folks to be vulnerable, like, again, everybody go check out the zine that Violet just dropped, because I think it brings up a lot of really important points of if you're asking folks to do something very vulnerable and then grading their effort, that's like, again, the colonial state reproducing itself in the classroom in a context that's really counter to the spirit of zines. And that's also completely losing the historicity of like making a zine instead of something else. Like if you're just reformatting a research paper like into a zine, like that's not really like the spirit of zining. And again, there's no perfect way to do a zine, but I agree with Violet that there's a lot of like maybe well-intentioned, but thinking about the impact of, particularly in a teaching setting where you are, like it or not, you're positioned as the educator, you're positioned as the expert. So what you say like has a tremendous impact on whatever learning community that you're a part of. So yeah, definitely 100% on what.
I love that. And Des, I'll just say the spirit of zining is a phrase that I'm going to hold on to.
Just like printing t-shirt money in this webinar.
I know.
Like honestly, somebody sponsor us.
This is
the bumper stickers just sell themselves at this point.
we only have about 20 minutes left, and I want to be sure. I know things move very fast. This has been a lot of fun. I want to not mention the Prairie Land case, excuse me. So especially when we're thinking about talking to students, talking to other community members and saying, zines are really powerful. Zines are a lot of fun. I'm very active in a local zine club myself, and we say things like, zines are great, come make a zine. Sometimes we might gloss over the fact that zines are just as powerful as any other carrier of information. And if that information runs counter to what the state wants, then things can get pretty messy. For anyone not familiar with the Prairie Land case, Dawn, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, because I think you mentioned it during our planning session, would you be willing to go over it quickly?
Yeah, it was a group of folks that were protesting outside of an ICE detention facility. This was last year. 9 folks were arrested. There's all kinds of just like ridiculous charges. And a lot of these folks are facing anywhere from like 30 to like 100 years in, federal prison. And zines played a role in that, right? As they're calling it sort of like, their terrorist documents and whatever. And I think that it's really important for my teaching this semester in particular that students are aware of it. When I teach zines, we put it into an historical context that there have been groups in the past that have made zines, like the Black Panther Party, right? And the American Indian Movement. These were all organizations that were fighting against, terrible stuff happening to their communities. And it's still happening. And I know that I've got some faculty members that are very mindful of this, and so putting mechanisms in place like students don't have to put their name on it, or they can be completely anonymous, like whatever, as an extra protection. But yeah, zines are fun and zines are great, but there also can be very real consequences. And I think from me, in my role, I feel like it's important for me to bring this up with students so that they understand on a broader sense.
I think this also highlights like we oftentimes, I think, especially in academic spaces where we're like, we want to have students make zines and stuff, we're like forgetting the historicity of this medium as a radical protest medium and like going back into like cut and paste cultures and radical print cultures, like that is where we get zines from. It's obviously not just Riot Girl and not just like punk scenes or music scenes, but there's something fundamentally like obviously anti-AI as we've talked about, but anti you know, that F you, I won't do what you tell me kind of vibe. That is part of zines. And I think that oftentimes gets lost when we're teaching them in academic spaces, particularly where it becomes about a grade and not about connecting with the history of radical zinesters. And I agree with Dawn that, you know, making a zine is inherently political as well. Like, why are you choosing to make this instead of something else? And so having that as an option for folks, but also making sure that when you are presenting zines that they are in, and this is just the archivist in me jumping out, but like that they're in their appropriate context. And it's not just like, we're doing this for a grade, but it's like we're connecting to, we have the option to connect to this much longer legacy of resistance and protest. That's part of it. And there are, and that's not like, obviously that's not, not everybody can take the same types of risks in that process too. And being aware of that, not everybody wants to put their name on something. Like, it's still funny to me, like at Zine office hours, I'm like, you don't even have to put your name on it. And people are like, shocked Pikachu. And I love that. Because it's like, no, don't put your name on it. Make up a whole new name. And people have like so much fun with that, you know? So I think there's a lot of like privacy, security, and just like the right to be forgotten is something that we don't have like a huge discourse on here in the States, but is something that I think is really part of zine making as well. Like there's an entire alter universe of like creators that make materials that don't have to be, part of the beauty is like it doesn't have to be attached to like your day-to-day kind of life and vibe.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, as a cataloger, I immediately think of like, you know, the catalogers who are very invested in doing detective work about, you know, like linking, you know, this identity to the, you know, I'm just like, what do we, you know, like, so first of all, don't do it in general, but also definitely don't do it with zines. Like, oh my gosh. One other thing I'll just mention briefly about the Prairie Land case. So I put together a zine called Zines Are Back and sort of trying to reflect on like, so it's essentially a headlines, you know, a series of headlines from 2006 until 2026 talking about how there's this resurgence in, you know, in news, you know, in news articles like zines are back and like, oh my gosh, it's not your grandfather's zine anymore. And like, what, you know, like, oh wow, they, you know, like the kids love it. And like, yeah, we've been doing the same story for 20 years. But anyway, but I sold that as a fundraiser for $5, and like raised $725 to send to the Prairie Land defendants, and which has sort of unlocked a whole thing where like I don't want zines to become my job, and I don't, you know, like you know, like money, you know, like in zines is complicated, but like there's a lot of power in that, you know, like you know, like just coming together and just being like, here's a $5 thing, and then like $725 later, you know, like, so, you know, how we can, again, bring that collaborative spirit together, you know, to bring zines into like radical action again, is so important to what we're doing.
Yeah, thank you all for that. I really appreciate this conversation. What I'm going to do now is transition over to some of the Q&As that we have, some of the questions that have come in through the Q&A. I'm just going to start at the top and move through. I'll just read this aloud, and then if anybody has anything to say about it, please do go ahead and do it. Jesse writes, I'm about to start a zine library at my institution, Community College Library. What are some lesser known tips for starting a zine collection? Or what do you wish you had known when you were first creating zine collections / libraries?
Well,
Overthink it? Oh, no.
yeah. Yes. Yeah. And there's also a lot of free copyleft zines, right, available that you could start a collection with. I know at my previous role at Simmons, a lot of stuff came from like Sprout Distro and Crime Bank, right? So they're more like, you know, like anarchist zines. I will say that the most popular zine, and we just had them out and folks could take them. They weren't cataloged or anything, right? So if you're curious about something, you just took it. The most popular one that I had to replenish weekly was Am I an Anarchist? Which I just thought was so lovely. But there's a lot of free resources. And I'll also say this. Librarians as a group, we're super helpful and we love to like share resources. Zine librarians, I'm not kidding, will come to your house with stuff. We're prepared. We'll brainstorm. So you have a community right? Not just the three of us here, but in the chat, in the zine librarians info, whatever, reach out to folks. We are super jazzed to help you.
Yeah, there's really something about that, like the meeting of these two relatively niche things, librarianship and zines, and then having them come together to zine librarians, and you're like, oh man, these people are like way over the top, and actually I mean that not derogatorily. I mean that actually positively. Yeah, so I just shared some resources. Again, zinelibrarians.info is a really good place to start. The thing that I would love for people who are starting new collections to think about is, again, planning for the long term. It's usually just one person's project. But I've often heard about zine collections that were just dumped in the trash after that person left the institution, and maybe that's not the worst thing in the world. Like, they are precious, but they need a curation process. And so, I love for people to think about, okay, when I go, is there institutional support enough to maintain this? Is this going to be a growing collection? And how can I ensure that it's not just a me project and it's other people are invested in this?
Yes, yes, yes. I completely agree. And I feel like there's a difference between starting a zine collection and trying to generate zine community at your institution, because that's very different. And starting a zine collection, you ain't got to catalog it. You don't need a budget. As Tom mentioned, you just need a good old printer. But and I think getting clear on do you want to start a collection, or do you want folks in your environment to be making zines? Do you actually want to start a zine club? Or in getting really clear on what your goals are for whatever zine project you're working on. This is something that we talk about with folks in the class that Dawn and I teach. But what is your actual goal? Do you just want to have zines available for folks to pick up and leave? Do you want to have a more institutionalized kind of zine collection, and figuring out what resources you have available to make that happen, besides the fabulous universe of zine librarians all over the planet?
There's so many beloved people in the chat that are just I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for showing up. I'm so appreciative that any of you could have been equally as good in this role, and it would have been also a wonderful chat. So it's just an incredible community.
This is why they should put us in charge of all the things in the world.
Not me personally. I'd be a terror.
I don't want all that, but
Not a cataloger.
Just a few things.
I want to let's see. So we touched on some of the topics that other folks are putting in here. For the remaining moments that we have, somebody's asking, and I'm interested in y'all's thoughts about this. So, as a zine maker, what's the best way to get your zine into a library? What are y'all's thoughts? We've talked a little bit about some considerations that y'all on the panel might want to communicate to zinesters when it comes time for an institution to think about collecting. Now, thinking about a zinester who's interested in getting their material into an institution, what are y'all's thoughts about this? How would you answer that question?
Well, this is why I want to write that zine of aimed at zinesters about getting their zines into libraries, because I think this is the main part of that question. One of the things, some of the things that Joshua and I were thinking about saying, is does the library have a policy that does it have a collection development policy for zines at all? Does it sort of give you some sort of sense of whether your zine fits in? You have a sense for whether it's again, sort of those institutional longevity things, is it going to be is your zine going to be discarded after three months or something? Maybe if that's maybe okay. Or is it going to be preserved forever? And is it in archives and nobody can see it? Well, not sorry. Oh man, I stepped in it with the archive stuff. I'm so sorry. Okay. I mean, so it's going to require a student or faculty member to show their identification and go into the archives and prove that they need, so sorry. I'll stop now.
I would say email. I just had somebody this morning send me an email. There's a map. Violet, you may have seen this come across the librarian listservs. So you have to get on there and put in your library that you have a zine collection, which is a great idea. Find out what libraries have a zine collection, and you can always just email somebody and say I'm a zine maker, blah, blah, blah. And in this case, the person is, a community member. Salem State's a public institution. Their son goes to Salem State. So it's yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll take your zine.
I think it's also worth, and I'm so glad that Violet and Joshua have the zine in the works.
I know.
But I think it's worth thinking about, like, why do you want your zine in a library? Because I'm biased too, because I'm a little bit outside of those spaces now, but there are so many ways to share your zine that aren't in a library context with all of the hangups that come with that Violet has mentioned. And so not to like discourage folks from contributing their zines to libraries or trying to, but you're dealing with an entire institutional system that you have no control over at that point. And so I feel like if your goal is to distribute your zine and get eyes on your zine, there's so many honestly better ways to do that than getting into a kind of institutionalized context for your zine. That being said, obviously, like if you want to share your zines, get on the zine map, like go find. But are you trying to share your zines for like your local community? Because maybe the public library isn't actually the best place for you to do that. So this is something that I talk with folks at like zine office hours about, is like, you know, are you just making the zine for you and your 12 closest friends, or you and your 100 closest friends? You know, those are different kinds of distribution decisions. So I think of the, you know, putting your zines in libraries as like a distribution decision, and like how, because at that point, do you even have, are you able to negotiate permissions for like, don't digitize this? If you don't know, then like slap that on your zine. So it kind of gets into like, do you craft your zine differently if you want different types of eyes on it or more eyes on it?
I also want to add, because I'm just thinking about Jenna Friedman, who's amazing, and if she's on this call, I love you. Make the institutions pay for your zine. Like you can send it and donate it, right? That's fine, but like they purchase, as an institution, colleges, universities, they have a collection budget. They are paying those folks that write books and whatever to be put on the shelf. You, as a creator, right, deserve a few bucks thrown your way because your thing is just as valuable as the book that's on the shelf. So donating is great, but maybe also see if somebody wants to buy it, especially if it's a place that has the money to do so.
I think this might be an okay place to stop, thinking that your zine is just as valuable as anything published any other way. Thank you all. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for sharing your wisdom. I think as everybody here has said, there are so many wonderful people out there making so much wonderful art that we could have done this panel with any number of people. Had we included everybody that we wanted to, it would have turned into a party, which I would have loved. Maybe next time. Thank you, everybody, for showing up and contributing to the chat and watching this. Thank you, everyone watching in the future. You are of the future. That's it, everybody. When the recording is ready, I'll send it out to the emails that you use to register. We'll put it out on all the socials, and it'll be available on the website. Until then, take a look at some of the other stuff we have up there on that website and go make a zine. It's great. Bye, everybody.